Okay, folks, sorry about that technical difficulty, but we're going to continue right through here. Our second special guest I'd like to welcome and introduce is our immediate past president, Judge Jim Mckay, whose vision for moving the OH forward helped set the groundwork for today's event, both in looking at commemorations as well as getting us from in the conference room and onto the internet. Judge Mckay.
Thank you, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very proud to be part of this historical moment. I remember well the times when I was a younger man. In those days, we had to find out from day to day till the next morning papers came out. We didn't have instant news as we have today. And I actually lived through this event, and I'm so delighted to get a chance to touch a piece of history. And thank you so much, Danny. He says that I did this, I did that. Without Danny Boy, this would be going on. And I'm very, very proud and pleased to be part of it. Thank you, Danny. Thank you for including me.
Thank you, Judge. At this time, we'll read the statement declaring the hunger strike, 1980. We, the Republican POWs in the H-Blocks, Long Kesh, demand the right of political recognition and that we be accorded the status of political prisoners. We claim that this right, as captured combatants in the continuing struggle for national liberation and self-determination. We refute most strongly the tag of criminal with which the British have attempted to label us and our struggle. And we point to the divisive, partitionist institution of the six-county state as the sole criminal aspect of the present conflict. All of us were arrested under repressive laws, interrogated and often tortured in RUC barracks, and processed through special non-jury courts where we were sentenced to lengthy terms of imprisonment. After this, we were put in the H-Blocks and were expected to bow the knee before the British administration and wear their criminal uniform. Attempts to criminalize us were designed to depoliticize the Irish national struggle. We don't have to recite again the widespread, almost total forms of punishment, degradations, and deprivations we have been subject to. All have failed to break our resistance. For the past 4 years, we have endured this brutality in deplorable conditions. We have been stripped naked and robbed of our individuality, yet we refuse to be broken. Further repressions only serve to strengthen our resolve that the gallant female comrades enduring the same hardships in Armagh jail. During this period, many individuals, religious figures, political organizations, and sections of the media have condemned the way we have been treated. Yet, despite appeals for resolution of the H-Block protest, the British government has remained intransigent and has displayed vindictive arrogance in dealing with the problem. They refuse to treat this issue with a realistic manner, which is just another reflection of their attitude to the entire Irish question. Bearing in mind the serious implications of the final step, not only for us, but for our people, we wish to make it clear that every channel has now been exhausted. Not wishing to break faith with those from whom we have inherited our principles, we now commit ourselves to a hunger strike. We call on the Irish people to lend us their support for our just demands, and we are confident that this support will be very much in evidence in the coming days. We call on all solidarity and support groups to intensify their efforts, and we also look forward with full confidence to the support of our exiled countrymen in America and Australia. We declare that political status is ours of right, and we declare that from Monday, October 27th, 1980, a hunger strike by a number of men representative H-Blocks 3, 4, and 5 will commence. Our widely recognized resistance has carried us through 4 years of immense suffering, and it shall carry us through to the bitter climax of death if necessary. Signed, PRO, H-Block Blanketman, Long Kesh Camp. At this time, I'd like to welcome our Freedom for Ireland chairman, Martin Galvin.
Karja, thank you, Danny. And I want to thank you and everyone for putting this on. As you mentioned, on October 27th, 40 years ago, Ireland was in the midst of a hunger strike. Began on October 27th. It would continue for 53 days until December 18th. It was led by Brendan Hughes, joined by Tommy McKearney, Ray McCartney, Tom McFeely, Leo Green, Sean McKenna, and INLA volunteer John Nixon. At the end of that hunger strike, which they waged to stop being tortured in the infamous H-Blocks of Lankesh, and because they refused to be dressed up and made to play a part as criminals, to play act and buttress up a British propaganda strategy, there was a respite. The British had room to make concessions. They could have resolved all of the issues, and instead, the British, as you know, redoubled their efforts, redoubled repression, and again, returned to the actions which would lead to the deaths of 10 hunger strike deaths in 1981. The Ancient Order of Hibernians, at its last national convention, resolved to study, promote, and honor the legacy of 1981. And any kind of study must begin with looking at the hunger strike of 1980 and the facts and circumstances which would lead to 1981 and those 10 hunger strike deaths. We are going to take you to three people. We're going to talk about the key parts of that protest. Number one, Fra McCann. His best friend, Kieran Nugent, was the first man on the H-Block Blanketman protest. He himself would join that protest. And when he got out, he would be sent to the United States. He would be here traveling, although it was illegal, although he was arrested in both Canada and the United States, would travel from San Francisco to Chicago, to Ohio, to New York, up and down the country, Boston, spreading the word, he and others, about what was happening to Irish Republican prisoners in Lankesh, and change the face of American support that we would see when 1981 hunger strike began. We're then going to go again to Belfast and Andree Murphy. She's going to talk about the campaign outside the prison, where people marched, organized, joined together to support the demands, the 5 demands of the prisoners, and how they were attacked, brutalized, how the British government responded to them. And then finally, we're going to go to, well, now Monaghan. He was at that time from County Tyrone, and Tommy McKearney, one of the 7 names you heard mentioned, one of the 7 men who were on that hunger strike. Get the inside story from him as to how that happened, how he volunteered to go on hunger strike, what happened at the end, and how easily the British government could have resolved those situations. And instead, Margaret Thatcher chose to provoke a situation in which the British would be defeated by the hunger strikers, which they would be defeated overwhelmingly in a way that changed the Irish political landscape and the American dimension of that landscape forever. We're going to start with Fra McCann, one of the blanket men, whose best friend, as I said, Kieran Nugent, was the first blanket man. Fra, are you with us?
I am indeed, Martin. Thank you for the welcome.
And I should mention also, before I begin, we welcome everybody who's on this broadcast. This is very important. The fact that we have so many people here today is a tribute to the hunger strikers themselves, the inspiration they still have so many years later. And it is a tribute to the support of Irish organizations, the Irish Northern Aid Committee, the Brehon Society, the Irish American Unity Conference, and others who are joining us today, just as Irish America came together behind the blanket men, behind the women and Armagh prisoners during the 2 hunger strikes of 1980 and 1981. All right, Fra, today you're an elected official. You've been a member of the Stormont Assembly for many years. You were elected to represent Belfast in the City Council. You're a politician. But in the Belfast in which you grew up, you decided, just as so many other young men and women, that the way forward was to join the Irish Republican Army to try and end the state, end British rule as your only way to get justice. What were the conditions like at the time that you grew up? What made you take that eventful decision?
Well, Martin, I think there was a number of events that took place that moved me in that position. In 1964, as a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old. The Devon Street riots took place, and where the RUC and the P Specials attacked a local election headquarters belonged to Sinn Féin and removed the Irish tricolour from the window. Now, they were all vague memories. And then 1969, I lived in the area on the Falls Road where Unionists led by the state forces came on and burned streets and streets of nationalist homes, murdered and injured local people. And then you moved on to the events of the Short Strand in 1970, where the area was attacked again when the IRA came out and defended that community. And then the 3rd of July, you had the siege of the Falls, where thousands of British soldiers curfewed the area. So there was a whole series of events. And as I said, I was very young at the time. I was 16 or 17. But those events were shaping me into believing that I had to do more. And then internment in 1971 probably was the catalyst. And I initially joined the Féin Éireann in the Falls area. And in November, I think about thereabouts late 71, I was accepted into the ranks of the IRA locally. And then obviously Bloody Sunday came. It was shortly after Bloody Sunday I was arrested for the first time and went on to the Maidstone prison ship docked in Belfast Harbour. I got out a number of months later. In November of 72, I was arrested again and interned for just over 3 years. During that period, I was lying beside a comrade who had been shot dead in an attempted escape that we done. We had escaped, and I didn't get out till near December that 1975 to be back in again. Obviously, in between all those times, you were getting arrested quite a lot. To be back in again in November, charged with membership of the IRA and possession of a pistol, and I was in 3 years. So I was on remand for about 7 months, and from there, after the 7 months, I was sentenced to 3 years and refused to wear the prison clothes. And the first part of my, it's strange, because Tommy would know, the first part of my time on the blanket was spent on solitary confinement in Belfast prison. We were kept naked in a cell constantly for myself about 15 months. But there were other comrades there from Belfast that had been in it and they're longer than me. And about August 1978, we got moved to H-Blocks and all the horrors that entailed. Obviously, I was a very close friend, remained till his death, a close friend of Kieran Nugent. I remember Kieran coming to internment in 1974, I think it was, getting out and then reporting back to the IRA again after his release. So we were fairly close and tight at that time. And when I got out of prison at the last time.
The British government, when you were originally in prison, you were recognized as, well, special category prisoner. Billy McKay, the legendary IRA leader in Belfast, Billy McKay, had been on a hunger strike in 1972. The British had recognized, well, they were asked for political status, and they said it was special category status. They conceded the conditions, but not the words. And this was like a prisoner of war camp in many respects that you'd see in World War II movies. But they had a change in policy. Beginning in March 1st, 1976, they said from then on, anyone who was jailed would have to be, or any males who were jailed would have to wear a criminal uniform. They would be treated as criminals so that the British could dress you up and say that the struggle in which you were part was no longer a political struggle against British rule, but it was part of a criminal struggle. And Kieran Nugent was the first. He said, if you want me to wear a criminal uniform, you're going to have to nail it. What was it like being in the H-Blocks? What did the British do to you, to Kieran Nugent, to the other prisoners to try to force you to wear a criminal uniform?
Well, obviously there was constant beatings. Most of this took place during moving from one cell to another, or on visits. There was inhuman and degrading searches. There was people were seriously injured during these. So it was a constant battle in the H-Block Citizen. Tommy would know. Tommy was in the same wing as me for a while. I always say to him when I see him, I relish the stories he used to tell out the door to keep our morale up, and part of that. So it was a constant battle over a long period of time, where the British state had determined to defeat Republicans through prisoners, but obviously that didn't take place. As I said, part of the first months of myself being on the blanket was in Crumlin Road Prison, and to be honest, I hadn't been tortured there, but I had been. The psychological impact of being on the Crum for that length of time had an impact on me. But it was still a shock when I got moved to the Blacks and moved in with comrades, was able to go in into a cell with people. So it was that constant battle. The cells were stinking. We had to up the ante in terms of the protest that we were carrying on, to go on a no wash protest, a dirty protest, right through. So it was a constant battle.
All right, there were no toilets inside the cell. So the British used this fact. You just had a mattress. Cells would be overflowing with human waste, and prisoners would be beaten when you went outside. What was it like being in those conditions for so long?
Well, it was shocking. Looking back on the thing now, it's shocking. People often say to me, "Would you do it again?" And I always say that if the circumstances had arose, then you would do it, certainly. But whether you're able to do it again at the age that I am, I don't know. But it was always a battle. It was but as more and more prisoners kept going on the protest, that added to the strength of it, and it added to the battle, because the Brits knew, and certainly the prison warders knew, that they were never going to defeat Republican prisoners. But certainly all H-Blocks were the same. But the block that I was in at that particular time, H3, had a high percentage of young people in it, and the prison officers chose them and handed out severe beatings.
All right, now you get released, and you're told that you're going to go to the United States. You get arrested first in Canada, then you get smuggled into Buffalo, you get shipped down to New York, and the next thing, you put on a plane, you start in San Francisco, you're doing TV interviews, you're speaking there to people, you're doing a press conference in the Massachusetts State House just before immigration arrives, you're doing TV interviews, and you traveled across the country. You, Kieran Nugent, Liam Carlin, and others. And all this time you were illegal, you're waiting for immigration to pick you up. What was it like at that time? You come out of jail, you've done no public speaking or no training in public speaking, and all of a sudden you're traveling across the United States speaking to Irish Americans and Americans about the plight of the H-Blocks.
Martin, I have to say it was terrifying when you arrived. I remember arriving in New York and looking out and looking at the buildings, the size of the buildings, that terrified me. I remember going up to the people's house we were staying on, and I always remember the likes of the Nixons, the Shanahans, and people like that there who are no longer with us. But they played a major part in helping us get about in terms of our movement. I remember going to San Francisco, and at that time when we were illegal, we were constantly told, be careful, because at any time you could be arrested, and get into the airport in San Francisco. And I says, how will I know who's meeting me? He says, don't worry, you'll know. And I went out, and there was two guys standing in full black and the thing. And I was saying to myself, are they Republicans or the FBI? You know, when you think so, it was. But again, it's only when you're at the start of in America that you realize how vast the area is. That I done an interview, I remember, at that stage with a guy from the San Francisco Chronicle, I think it was, and that was one of the things. And a big guy, I think that was one of the things that started the break the news thing wide open in San Francisco. I met people from a Delancey State Forum at that stage who was able to help us in getting publicity and things. So it was just constant thing. You were meeting relatives of people here who lived in the States, Irish Americans, and but you were also doing meetings with politicians, with community leaders, and quite a lot more, doing them interviews to try and highlight the thing. But the important thing in all that was to try and strengthen the base that was there, and that was Irish Northern Aid, the Irish Prisoner War Committee.
All right, and I should say Irish Northern Aid did work with the AOH, with other Irish organizations that marched and demonstrated with us. It's a very important part of it.
That's right.
You were able to do interviews. I think Warren Hinkle in San Francisco, you started to do
the name I was trying to get.
And these started to go across the country, so much so that the issue, the H-Blocks, which wasn't widely known, wasn't widely understood, it completely changed. You did a press conference in Massachusetts with a woman, Marie Howe, with a state resolution, the FBI or immigration coming in after you. Did you notice, how long did it take before you noticed a big change in terms of Irish American awareness of what was happening in the H-Blocks?
It would have took a number of months, because a lot of this depended on local members of various units of Irish Northern Aid, or the AOH, or the Irish Prisoner War Committee, and the publicity that they were generating. You mentioned the press conference I done with Marie Howe, a wonderful, wonderful human being. And halfway through the press conference, somebody, like the state officials, whispered her and told her that the immigration or the feds were coming up as Thursday arrest me. And I spoke for a couple of minutes, and then they took me down the back way and took me out of the house. I'd done an interview that night live on a television program in Philadelphia, and they rated there also. So they were constantly on you had to be on your toes to try and stay in front of us. But the publicity that we were generating was huge. And so much so that we had heard, and I remember the conversations that we would have had, Martin, so much so that there was constant pressure being put by the Brits and the Irish government. Let's not forget their role in the whole thing at the time, to get us out of the country.
And we're going to go on to the next speaker in a minute, but one of the best things that happened to you was you got arrested by immigration. You then got out on bail, which meant you could actually be advertised, publicized, TV cameras. There was actually a crew which went to Belfast just to examine Bob O'Brien, to examine the H-Blocks, took pictures that appeared, with the H-Blocks, all of that setting in motion that what would happen. So in 1981, when that hunger strike started, all the groundwork was there, the inspiration was there, and people were going to come behind it and come behind in 1981, behind the Hunger Strikers.
I think just one comment on that, Martin.
Yeah.
When I was taken to court, Desi Mackin was the other person was arrested with me. Desi done 17 months. I think I'd done about 17 or 18 days. But one of the things, when I was taken to court, within 2 minutes, the judge had known Frank Durkin, another great man at the time, and the judge was deporting me, had already decided. And he said to Frank Durkin, have you ever thought of applying for political asylum? And Frank says, what? He says, well, if Frank says, yeah, go ahead. And he says, that's okay. You're released on $30,000 bail. And I walked out. And so that certainly helped along the way.
All right. So what happened? We're going to go to Andree just in a second, but you got released, which meant you could be advertised. We could, you could be sent over, address crowds everywhere. Desi Mackin was actually in on an extradition warrant with a ridiculous charge where the SAS had surrounded him and wounded him and shot one of their own members. And Frank Durkin, the great civil rights lawyer, nephew of Paul O'Dwyer, uncle of Brian O'Dwyer, was able to win that case for Desi Mackin, a political asylum case on an extradition. And that case became the template. It was the example that we followed in terms of all the political deportation cases, all the Irish political deportee cases, everything that followed. All right, we're going to turn now to Andree Murphy, but we're going to begin first. We're going to go to my counterpart, Dolores Desch, the LAOH Freedom for All Ireland chair.
Thank you, Martin. Really pleased to be part of this event today. And I want to thank Fra for his story and what he was telling us. Looking forward to hearing from Tommy McKearney as well. Our next panelist, Andree Murphy, is the Deputy Director of Relatives for Justice. She's also on the Board of Directors for Ireland's Future and is a reputable journalist and political commentator. So welcome, Andree. I just wanted to start off by asking you about the response to the hunger strikes, the 1980 ones in particular, but the other ones as well, in the community, and then what was done to kind of by the security forces, the British government, and even loyalist squads to kind of knock that enthusiasm, knock that support down.
Hi, Dolores. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for making me a panelist in this. I think, you know, over here we've had no reflection on 1980, remarkably, and to have an event like this is so important for us here as well as in the US. And it's really important to have, you know, we could have listened for an hour, I think, to Fra and Martin reminiscing. In terms of your question, you know, Karen earlier on talked about the experience in Armagh prison, and not forgetting the women who were in Armagh who were also enduring the dirty protest and also went on hunger strike. The story of what happened on the streets is about women too, because led by mothers and partners, sisters and daughters of the men who were in the blocks, and also the women who were in Armagh, there was a response on the streets which was saying that the conditions were absolutely horrific, and that, you know, there needed to be a response to that. And that had been built up during the period from 1976 when criminalisation was introduced, and really grew, and you saw the emergence of the H-Block and Armagh Committee. And again, led by women like Miriam Daly and Bernadette McCalliskey. In terms of how the state responds, really, when we look at the experience of conflict, we can often look at it through the prism of individual cases. And this week, I'm sure many of you were engaged in listening to what happened to the family of Patrick Finucane. But what you can also do is look at themes and patterns and see how the conflict played itself out. So if we look at, say, the period when Fra was talking about 1971 and what happened in that year that prompted him to join the IRA, the state was involved in 40% of the killings. But then in 1972, after the bad publicity and the focus on Bloody Sunday, they completely reduced their what they did on the streets, and instead promoted loyalism. So you see the emergence, the founding and emergence of the Ulster Freedoms Fighters, the UDA and the UVF, being controlled and directed by the state, and they take the place of the state in terms of what they're doing. But then in 1980, what you see is that loyalism is very engaged in killings, but in a particular way. So the UDA re-emerges and starts to kill members of the H-Block and Armagh Committee. So you see the assassination of Miriam Daly, of Noel Little, of Ronnie Bunting. And you see that happening very much, and everyone is saying that is done by the state. So if I do up a graph, I really can't put those killings down as loyalist killings, because they are very much directed by the state. Then we see at the beginning of 1981, it's marked by the assassination attempt on Bernadette McCalliskey and her husband, Michael, while the British Army is ensconced and watches their rural home. And they survive just about, but you know, that again is targeted political assassinations on people who are only talking about the conditions and the experience of prisoners, and trying to create leverage so that their status can be improved. Then, of course, you see the emergence of the second hunger strike, and everyone knows this hunger strike is different. You see one prisoner going on, and then a second, and then a third. And you see thousands upon thousands of people on the streets. You see a re-emergence of street politics that hadn't been seen since the civil rights time. And what happens? Loyalism. And it's really, you know, if you don't believe in collusion, look at 1981. Loyalism kills 4 people at the beginning of the year, and then the state starts to shoot dead people on the streets. So you see children killed with plastic bullets, women killed with plastic bullets. You see hundreds of thousands of plastic bullets fired at people. You know, there's photographs that you see now of children in prams, babies, who are, their parents have put hurling helmets on them as they walk along because they are terrified that the British Army or the RUC is going to fire a plastic bullet at their head. So this is the state response to that. Then you see that the hunger strikes end and the street protests end. And then by the end of the year, the British state stops killing people again. And then loyalism is killing people again. And in late that year, they kill an independent councillor from Ardoyne. So you see how the state can turn on loyalism, turn it off, and also be engaged in street actions when it is politically convenient for them. But the big theme that goes across this is that there is absolutely no accountability. For those children who are killed, Nora McCabe who's killed, the use of plastic bullets, nobody is held to account for it, and there is very little spotlight on that experience of civilians.
All right, why do you think, Andree, why do you think the British government, this was a peaceful protest, you had people on the streets. In fact, one of the things that broke open or publicity, we had Lily Fitzsimmons and woman Kathleen Gallagher and others coming to New York. They participated in the St. Patrick's Day parade wearing blankets, and how much attention that got. But why do you think the British government, they say that they're a democratic state in the north of Ireland, why do you think they responded just to the peaceful protests on the street in this way, shooting, assassinating people like Miriam Daley or John Turnley or others, using plastic bullets? We heard about Frances Meehan, for example, just in the lead up to the 1980 hunger strike, her brother being struck with a plastic bullet and describing that. That was replicated over and over again. Why do you think the British government responded with so much violence to legal political protests?
Because of the nature of the protests in the prisons. The protests in the prisons are about criminalisation and delegitimization of those who are fighting against British occupation and militarization. And so when you have a population who is engaged in popular protest with thousands of people on the streets, what they are doing is saying that this is a legitimate expression. And then what the state is doing is saying, well, we need to delegitimize those people on the streets. If we shoot them, if we create chaos, if we create a riot situation, and they create the riots, nobody else does, then what they do is delegitimize the calls for status in the prisons and the wider calls around the constitutional status of the North. And that is their response to it. It is completely thought out. It isn't accidental. It is all, and once you do that, once you say West Belfast is a criminal community, the areas that these hunger strikers come from are criminal communities, then what they do is lessen the attempt to lessen the popular discourse about that. Of course they fail, because then you see Bobby Sands is elected by a population. You see TDs elected in the South. They completely fail in what their objective is to do, but that is always their first response, is to try to frighten people, kill people. When that doesn't work, when the people still keep coming out, they create the conditions where they say, these are terrorists, these are criminals. And that is absolutely the objective.
All right, we've mentioned the Relatives Action Committee and mothers and families. What was the impact of families? These are people, most of them, a lot of them were non-political, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, and all of a sudden they're thrust into the middle of an emotional issue because of the hunger strike. What was the impact on families at this time?
And I think that there's two things need to be said around it. Many of the people who were killed, in fact, most of them by the British Army and RUC during that time, there was absolutely no riot situation, or, you know, they were children who were playing beside their homes. I mean, you heard from Mark Kelly talking about Carol Ann that summer, or Nora McCabe, who was literally going to the shop, you know, so then there are families who are going, wow, this is what's happened to us. They're grieving, but they're having lies told about their loved ones. Julie Livingston's body is still not buried. And you have the Belfast Telegraph saying that her skull was remarkably thin, and that's why that plastic bullet killed her. So the family is not only grieving, they are also having to meet the lies. They're also having to go and try and assert themselves. But there's this big, huge story that's happening. There's the hunger strikes are going on. So when Danny Barrett is shot dead, there isn't a single journalist who reports on it. He's only 15 years old. The only people who go and visit them are Father Raymond Murray and Claire Riley from Relatives for Justice, who go and knock on their door. And so for the past 40 years, trying to assert what happened to them, having to assert the lack of justice or attention, has been completely alongside their process of grieving. And you know, the brothers and sisters growing up without this child, who will often talk about losing their father and their mother that day when their loved one was killed because of the trauma in their family. But the pursuit of justice and truth takes the place of grief. And right now, we're having to deal with the legacy of that. And that's, you know, you're engaged in that, the Hibernians are engaged in that, and that support is so, so important for families.
Right. We're going to move on to Tommy McKearney in 1 second. Just if you can answer very briefly, what was the level like of support in the 26 counties for the H-Blocks, Blanketmen and Women in Armagh?
If the experience of people in the North had been forgotten or ignored as a result of censorship that was brought in, and Section 31 absolutely worked in the South, 1981 and the hunger strikes broke that. On every street corner, on every rural wall, on every mountain, you had support the hunger strikers, you had posters of Bobby Sands everywhere, you had black flags lining the inner city of Dublin, the inner city of Cork, and all across Kerry. It absolutely transformed people's approach to the North and transformed their interest in it. And, you know, you look around Leinster House today and it is the complexion of Leinster House is a direct result of the hunger strikes.
Okay, we're next going to go to somebody who was inside. And again, if you have questions, please try to hit them up. We'll put you in line.
Martin, if I can interrupt for a second there on the questions, since you mentioned the questions, we do have people monitoring YouTube. So if you're on our YouTube channel, you can ask questions there, and Tim Noonan and Chris Cook will also bring those over to the webinar in Zoom. Those of you on Zoom can ask the questions. There's a Q&A section. You could ask them, and then we have a few people that we may bring in if time allows. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption, Martin.
All right, next we're going to go one of the 7 men who were on that hunger strike. They were actually picked, the number 7 was taken because of signatories on the 1916 proclamation. They felt that they were carrying on that struggle. He was chosen because he represented Tyrone. Tommy McKearney. Tommy.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for this invitation to speak.
Andree has mentioned collusion, killings by loyalists, and your family was a victim of one of the worst in Moy in County Tyrone. Could you just tell us very briefly what happened to them?
Well, my brother worked in a butcher's shop, the family butcher shop, and he was there in the shop one evening along with my uncle John when a loyalist gunman came in and shot the 2 of them dead. And we've long believed and have quite sufficient cause for belief that the state was involved in collusion in that event. I'm sure Andree and the Relatives for Justice, Hatfinucan Centre in Derry can support this, but certainly there was collusion involved in it.
All right, and you also, your family was actually involved. You had relatives who were involved in the War of Independence in this, who were trying to free all of Ireland, and you had 2 brothers who have been killed in the conflict. Just you yourself ended up in prison, and there was a famous situation, a doctor named Robert Irwin did a television program. You ended up in front of what's called a dip-block, one of the non-jury courts, and we wanted you to explain how you were convicted, sent to prison by one of these special non-jury dip-block courts named for a Lord Dip-block who recommended them, how you came to see Dr. Robert Irwin and be part of that TV program that he did.
Yeah, well, the Dip-block courts were established. Lord Dip-block had previously been a member of British intelligence, And the objective of the H-Block court was to secure a conviction, not to secure justice. What it meant was that there was one judge, no jury, and on what we call inverted rules of evidence. In other words, the defendant had to prove that any statement made was taken illegally. So that's a very difficult, nigh impossible thing to do. When I was captured and arrested, I was taken to the notorious holding centre, Castlereagh, and for 7 days, viciously beaten and during the interrogation, to such an extent that when after charge, taken to the police holding centre in Belfast, the RUC, that's the police, Northern Police appointed Dr. Robert Irwin, was so appalled at the bruising and condition that I was in that he wrote to the Secretary of State and made a complaint about the treatment I had received, because I wasn't the only one that he had witnessed this type of treatment, but this was effectively, I suppose, the straw that broke the camel's back. As a result of this, he was interviewed by local television, and in fact, I think it was the BBC in Britain interviewed him as well, and it created quite a considerable uproar at the time, leading to an inquiry, but didn't really change that much. I was convicted on the basis of a verbal statement, which I didn't make, but that was sufficient in a H-Block court to have me sentenced to life in prison.
Just to explain, Dr. Irwin was actually a doctor. He was employed or used by the Royal Ulster Constabulary. He complained, was interviewed by British television. There was an Amnesty International investigation, which said that about 80% of the prisoners in Lankesh were there just based on statements, and many of them had been taken as a result of beatings or just statements that were made up by British forces. And then they would send you to that prison and say that you were now a criminal and wanted you to wear a criminal uniform. Just want to ask you very briefly, you were in jail with Brendan Hughes, who led the first hunger strike. You were in a wing with Bick McFarland, who'd be the leader of the 1981 hunger strike, the OC, with Ricky O'Rourke, who'd be the PRO during that hunger strike, and also with Bobby Sands, who obviously died on that hunger strike. And I think you told me a story just to show how the morale was kept up by prisoners in these terrible conditions, which Fra McCann described. You played a part in a poem that's just in Bobby Sands' writings, Tom Barry. It starts out, "For Barry's soul we prayed in hell, pathetic creatures endured in pain. We never heard his requiem bell, but our own in tortured's livid strain." And it goes on to say, "Oh, cross Barry and kill Michael grave and resurrect the battle cry with Barry boys be brave." Now, he was able to compose, this is actually the anniversary, it was mentioned this past week, about the Battle of Kilmichael 100 years ago. He was able to compose, it's a lengthy poem, I'm not going to read all of it, but something that's studied, appears in books, take inspiration from that, give it to the other prisoners. Oh, how did he go about writing that?
Very little writing facilities at the time. Possibly.
But were you involved in something that inspired that?
Oh, yes. Well, at the time, several of Bobby's poems, one have been inspired by his own personal experience of talking to other prisoners in the cell with him or on the wing with him. That particular poem about Tom Barry, part of I suppose, if you like, my duty or responsibilities, and Fra has reminded me of it, was to tell out from the side of the door, to call up the wing, stories. Sometimes they were just old anecdotes from my childhood, but more often than not, I would tell the history of Ireland. And one of the stories I did tell was the story of Kilmichael, the ambush at Kilmichael, and not the ambush, but the engagement with the British at Crossbarry. And obviously, talking of the two engagements, Tom Barry, who led the flying column, he was featured largely in the two stories. And as a result of that, Bobby picked up on that and wrote that poem after we had heard from a visitor, one of the visitors that came to visit us, that Tom Barry had passed away. And I think it was almost like a requiem for Tom Barry that Bobby wrote that particular poem. And he either would use a small piece of metal, maybe a cross on a crucifix of a rosary beads, to write it on the wall. Sometimes he might have a pencil lead, which he would write a few lines on cigarette papers. secrete them and smuggle them outside. It was a pretty difficult thing to do. We didn't have access to writing materials or any reading material.
All right, so what you're describing is you and these other prisoners, you're on a wing, you're in the H-Blocks of Lancashire in the terrible conditions that Fra McCann described, you're subject to searches, and you were able to keep each other's morale up by things like that, doing recitations, songs. He was able to write songs and poems. I think he did Back Home in Derry after spending a couple of days with Dixie Elliott from Derry, and keep everybody's morale up. In 1980, you are chosen to represent Tyrone. You volunteered, you tell Brendan Hughes, who was the leader of that hunger strike, that you would be one of the people who would go on the hunger strike. You volunteered, you're selected to represent the hunger strike. It goes on for about 53 days. And I just want to get an idea, what was your condition like at the end of that hunger strike? I believe you and Sean McKenna were the two people very close to death.
Well, Sean was closer to death than I was. Now, towards the last few days, I was drifting in and out of consciousness. My body had started to break down. My kidneys were failing, and as a result of that, the enzymes, naturally produced enzymes in the body, start, rather than to be passed out through the normal process, were recirculating through the bloodstream, leaving me, in many cases, almost illusional or delusional at times. So it's a very distressful situation. My eyesight was failing. Different bodily functions were failing. Now, I was told later by the medical authorities in the prison, at a time when I suspect they had no reason to tell me lies, that they had estimated that my life expectancy was between 24 and 48 hours. Now, hunger strike death is not scientific. To die on hunger strike isn't scientifically predictable, so it could be 72 hours, but certainly their estimate was that it was really hours rather than anything else. Sean McKenna, he was estimated to die within a few hours had it not been called off.
How did you find out that the hunger strike had ended on October, in December 18th?
Well, in my case, because I was really incapacitated at the time, I remember the prison medics, what we call the medics, the prison officers that acted as medics, came in, offered me medication, which I refused. And they said, "Do you not realize that this hunger strike is over?" And I said, "Well, I'm not going to believe prison officers." So they sent for Brendan Hughes, and Brendan came in and told me. Now, it had been called off, I believe, maybe possibly an hour before I was told. There had been Sean McKenna obviously was totally incapacitated, unconscious. I was drifting in and out of consciousness. So Brendan didn't really consult with me in the initial stages. He talked to the other men on the hunger strike, the other four. And then I think that realized that I hadn't been informed. So he was brought down to my cell to tell me that it's over. Take whatever medication they're offering you. That's how I found out.
All right. And then the British government was given an opportunity at that time. They could have made reasonable concessions on wearing your own clothes. There was some intimation that they would let you wear your own clothes afterwards, after they were no longer under the pressure of a hunger strike. And you were hopeful, the other prisoners were hopeful that this situation could have been resolved in the H-Blocks of Lancashire, the same way Billy McKee, that hunger strike had been resolved. But what happened instead? When did you and the other prisoners know that there wasn't going to be no movement, that Margaret Thatcher was committed to try and push through, break the prisoners, break the struggle, and that inevitably there was going to be another hunger strike that Bobby Sands would begin on March 1st of 1981?
Well, of course, it was a growing realization rather than an instantaneous realization. There had been very serious overtures made to us on hunger strike, both from within the prison, from the senior British civil servants, and through intermediaries in the days before the hunger strike ended. Serious overtures that concessions, sufficient concessions, an acceptable compromise, if you like, would be available. And there was always a realization that prison conditions would change and could change gradually, if nothing other, for no other reason than a large systems such as the prison would change gradually anyway. At best, could only change gradually. Now, gradually meant months at most rather than years. So we were expecting to see movement, but we needed and expected to see movement quite early on, and certainly we needed and wanted and expected to see movement in terms of our own clothing, just for a start, knowing that thereafter we could and would work on that. I would imagine as the first weeks, this was coming up to Christmas, there was very little done by way of acknowledging the season of the year. There was a growing realization that the British were intent on stonewalling and refusing to move. I suppose by the end of January now, I can't be absolutely sure, because to a large extent, I feel like, out of the consideration through my condition for a long time after that. I certainly wasn't party to the negotiations or the discussions internally, but certainly by the end of January, we were beginning to realize that the British had reneged, had recused themselves from any responsibility, hadn't availed of the opportunity to introduce the conditions that would have allowed us to make progress, and that a second hunger strike was becoming increasingly inevitable, as it became the case on the 1st of March, 1981.
And the demands you were making, they were reasonable, just no prison uniform, because you saw that as a badge of criminalizing the struggle, not doing menial prison work, but doing other organizing educational, recreational pursuits, association with other prisoners, a visit and a parcel, which other prisoners had, and remission. But these things were all negotiable. You and the other prisoners thought that there could be reasonable compromises, which Thatcher could have done, granted, without difficulty or without much difficulty, which would have resolved it, never would have suffered the major setback that she did politically outside the prison, but at a terrible cost to Bobby Sands and the other men who would die on hunger strike. Would that be fair to say?
Well, that is fair to say. That a lot, as a matter of interest, most of those conditions were eventually met over probably the first half of the 1980s for a series of different reasons, but the British were able to accommodate them in time anyway. But look, what was happening there, it wasn't for creature comforts that we were on hunger strike. There was a profound political message, and the British wanted to have us in criminal uniforms so that they could effectively dictate the narrative, as Andree has talked about, to dictate the narrative. That's what was happening in the northern part of Ireland was not, as the world perceived it to be, the British withdrawal from empire, another colonial stage in Britain's downfall from its place as a superpower. The world could see Britain in Ireland as the aggressor, and this was what Britain was attempting to do, to change the narrative to its own advantage, one so that even in terms of its own domestic, and you have to always keep in mind that there are many decent, honourable people in England who would not have tolerated a situation had they known the facts, and this was what was at stake, was to change and alter the narrative to the British advantage. And one of their big gambits was to have us dressed in criminal attire doing menial criminal tasks, and this would be used as a type of photo opportunity to demonstrate by graphically, in their eyes, the way they have seen, to graphically demonstrate that the IRA was not a liberation army. It was not a battle for national self-determination or independence, but rather it was, in their terms, criminal terrorism at best and a mafia-style operation at worst.
All right, thank you, Tommy. We're going to go to questions. We had one question: who are the names of the other people on hunger strike? Which Brendan Hughes, yourself, Tommy McKearney, Ray McCartney, Tom McFeely, Leo Green, Sean McKenna, and INLA volunteer John Nixon. All right, Danny, do we have questions? Now, I want to thank all the panelists, and the fact that we have such an outstanding number of people signing up is a tribute to our panelists as well as the inspiration of the hunger strike. Danny, do we have questions?
Martin, there are several questions that I have from YouTube as well as from the chat.
Danny has not gotten older looking. That's somebody else. That's
Oh, this is Tim Noonan. Sorry.
Tim Noonan, that's all right. Tim's going to handle the questions, Martin. I was actually on mute. But before we go to the questions, I'd like everyone to know that if you go to our webpage, which is simply www.aoh.com, on the front page, there is a link to our Christmas appeal. And Martin might say something at the end about the Christmas appeal. This is all of our fundraising efforts that go to support the causes in the north of Ireland. This event is to help bring recognition to the Christmas appeal. Everyone's welcome to participate. And as you can imagine, with COVID, it's a very difficult challenge. And having Fra and Tommy and Andree and join us today, Andree, I mean, this is really helping us out, and we appreciate it. Tim Noonan.
Okay, we have a question from the chat. What is the current status of Brendan Hughes and other accounts at Boston College? Are they still restricted to protect those still living?
I'm sorry, what is the status of?
Brendan Hughes.
Brendan Hughes passed away. He was a very good friend of mine. I always respect him and admire him. Brendan Hughes passed away several years ago.
Okay. And James Gallagher asks, regarding the prisoners who could not find employment because of their convictions, it is my understanding that the situation included innocent diplomatic convicted men. How long did this policy last? I ask this because I seem to recall that during my visit in the North from 99 to 2003, this policy seemed to be still enforced.
It still lasts. Fra, do you want to take that, or is there a particular person that was referred to, or do you want me to answer it?
It's not referred to anyone directly.
Fra's muted.
It still lasts. The people like Fra McCann, Tommy McKearney, can't come to the United States because of the criminal convictions. Andree has a response to that.
Yeah, and things have gotten quite sophisticated now. You're quite right that special courts can be used at any time. But in particular, what we see are things, the term national security used, whether it's in the prosecution of individuals, whether it's for families who are trying to uncover the truth about their loved ones, or anything that's happening. There can be closed material proceedings introduced at any point on the grounds of national security. And that is now a very formal part of the criminal justice process, and operates in a way that's probably less blunt than the diplock courts, but is nonetheless incredibly effective in terms of due process and the rule of law.
Okay, next question.
Irish Pete asks from YouTube, from your experiences, what is the most important lesson for Irish Americans to apply in the ongoing fight against British occupation of Ireland?
Is that referred to anybody specifically, or?
No, it was. No, I don't think it was referred to anybody at the time. I think Fra was actually speaking when it went out, when it was asked. So
It's about Irish America?
It's what lessons can be learned from this experience for Irish Americans. I'll just read it again. From your experiences, what is the most important lesson for Irish Americans to apply in the ongoing fight against British occupation of Ireland?
Can I come in here?
Can be done as a result of Fra McCann and the others coming here. That was a major advance. Yeah, political action. We have, for example, the letter signed by 24 congressmen last week for Pat Finucane. We have publicity such as we're doing now. We have fundraising, but it's important for Irish American organizations, for Irish America to come together as they did when Fra McCann, as a result of Fra McCann and the others coming together in 1980, as a result of the hunger strike of 1981. And using that power, contacting our politicians, making sure that Ireland is an American issue. Fra, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very important question. I think first of all, Martin, you had asked earlier on about the impact that the tours by prisoners and others had in 1980 and into 1981. You know, I remember, as I said, when I first arrived in America, there was very little publicity, but I think it was about the 18th of December, or there actually might have been the day the first hunger strike ended. I was down in Manhattan, and I'd phoned, I think it was yourself. We were doing a meeting in a church hall beside the United Nations, and it was packed, and we just got word that the first hunger strike ended. Now, initially when you arrived, you wouldn't have got packed halls. And I remember walking down, and there was the likes of posters advertising the local newspapers in New York, and they were carrying the headlines, "Hunger Striker Close to Death." Now, I remember someone saying to us that never happened actually from the Bloody Sunday or places like that. So the breakthroughs that you were getting, and I think that's the important thing. In today's world, things are apt to slip. Political pressure is the greatest thing in the world, and America can play a big part in it. I think what we need to do is to push towards a united Ireland. And that's what this has all been about. It's all about unifying Ireland. And I think the more pressure we can put on political establishments to head in that direction, I think the whole question of a referendum on the future of the North is key to that. And I think we need to do that.
All right, so what's Frost saying, if we work politically, if we work in publicity, all the work that we do, put pressure on the British to allow that border poll, that referendum, to allow for United Ireland. That's what he's recommending. I think there's a question for Andree about the female prisoners in Armagh.
Timothy Burke asked, they'd like to know more about the female strikers that joined in, and in particular, Mary Doyle.
So I'm definitely not going to speak instead of any of those women who experienced that. I think it's really, really important for us to understand that women's history during the conflict is often very neglected and is something that always needs particular attention paid to, but it's also a lot more difficult. So the women that were held in Armagh prison suffered very particular harms, where if you read the accounts from the time, they were also subjected to some horrific brutality, including sexual assaults in the form of strip searching. They had lasting impact on them. Because of women's bodies, their bodies were used against them every month. There's a particular experience of women who were also mothers while they were prisoners during that time. That is very little, that isn't written about or heard very much. And the fact that I'm speaking here instead of somebody who experienced that is indicative of how difficult it is for women who went through the prison system to speak. And we need to think about ways that we can ensure that we hear that. So it's a great question to ask. I mean, of course, Mary Doyle has been an incredible a person throughout the conflict, and is someone who I think we all look to in terms of her legacy of community involvement, of being in touch with her own community in North Belfast, and who has remained so firm in terms of not allowing her community, her experience, or her family to be criminalized in any way. It's quite breathtaking at times. So, I think it's a fantastic question, and I'd encourage, in recent times, there's been a fantastic report done on the experience of those who were on the blanket and experienced the prison brutality, and it's been issued by unwary solicitors. And it highlights the brutality, the torture, and frames them in a very legal way. And I'd encourage everyone to try and get copies of that. I can certainly forward a copy to Martin if Martin doesn't already have it.
Next, another question. Is there a repository here in the USA for information from the hunger strike era? I have many pamphlets, etc., that I would like to donate to an appropriate library or university.
There's many books written. I have a bookshelf written about the hunger strike. Blanketman was early on the hunger strike. There's a great one by Tim Pat Coogan. At the time, there's many. If you look up a biography or bibliography, you'll get many books about that period, and hopefully there'll be more.
Martin, I think he was asking also about archiving the materials. And Tim, if you get his name, we will hook them up with one of the AOH archives. And the next comment or question is going to come live from past national president, individual who's been very involved with Freedom for Ireland for quite some time, Ned McGinley.
I guess that's me, Danny.
That's right.
I'd just like to go to say that we as the AOH, and I'm going to refer this to Martin, who's done so much great work on this, but we should again begin. I know we tried to bring over some of the prisoners in the past, and we were rejected. But I think that we might have a more fertile ground for this with the new administration coming in. So I'm hoping that we can begin to ask, and the AOH, of course, is going to be very prominent in this. We can begin to bring over some of those prisoners to begin to speak to us on this as spokespersons. I know over the years, we were able to bring different people here and actually drive them around to different meetings. And Martin well remembers this, of course. He did even more than we did, but we were very instrumental in doing this. And I think it could be another time, especially when boosting what Fra just said, when he was discussing the fact that we're very important to getting that border poll up. I think it's really time for that. As a past president and having such a high interest and a frequent visitor to the North in those times, I would love to see us put a little more stress on this.
Thank you, Ned. I can tell you this, we're already in the works on that. Martin has a game plan. We have already talked to some of our political contacts, and we would love to have somebody here in 2021. Once we want the only thing to stop the visits to be COVID, and once COVID's done, we want to be on track to bring some folks in.
Yeah, it would be great to bring them around to different state conventions. Or, of course, this has become a very important medium, the Zoom meetings. Thank
you, Ned. Back to you, Martin.
Do we have what's the next question?
Yes, we have a couple more questions. Sorry. Linda has asked. She asked if there were wages paid while on active service. So, and a qualification of that, but like with the U.S. military, when you're in active duty, there is a wage that's paid that's more than regular pay, regular wages. So she asked, was there any sort of compensation while they were actually going through the hunger strike, and was there any compensation thereafter the hunger strike?
I do know that we contribute to Green Cross now, and Commencara and Green Cross used to distribute money, a small amount of money, to the families of Irish political prisoners. I don't know if Fra wants to talk about how much money his family would have received, or other people are telling me how much money their family would have received. But one of the heroic things that was done by Irish Americans, in fact, the AOH in I believe it was 1978 or 79, when the convention was in Killarney, Lily Fitzsimmons and some other people from Green Cross came to the convention. And as a result of that, there was a vote to have all Freedom for All Ireland funds go to them, just to money for Irish political prisoners' families. There were a number of groups, Irish Northern Aid, other groups, which gave money to Ancum and Cara. 26 counties would oversee everything, and Green Cross in the 6 counties to distribute a small amount of money to these families of political prisoners. But it was badly needed. The British wanted to break the prisoners by denying them money, and because of America, partly because of America, that did not happen.
I think Fra had a statement. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, well, see, the people in active service, regardless of what part of the movement they were in, the area was a volunteer organization, and people didn't do it obviously for money. When prisoners was in jail, Green Cross, as Martin and Common Carrick in the 26 counties, there would have been a small amount. It could have been as little as £8 a week, which I don't know what that would work into now, probably about $14. And then to help with parcels, food parcels that made have been loved. But just back to one of the issues, and it might be interesting. There was the launch of a report there an international report into the torture and the H-Blocks in Armagh. It was released about 6 weeks ago. It took a number of years to do. It's very extensive on the thing. And the section on the women in Armagh, the beatings and the torture that went on are also is really, really difficult. So maybe if I know that in Kostya, the Irish Republican Prisoners Organisation in Ireland, and Belfast certainly, that they had released it. So it's a very, very good document if people want to get it. And it's, I say, it's only been released within this past 6 weeks.
Next question, was it Professor Robert White? Did I see his name come on the screen?
Yes.
Does he have a question? Or Professor White has a tremendous collection at Indiana University at Purdue. They actually have the Irish people online. They have a lot of other materials there if anybody wants to consult them. I don't know if he had a question.
We're going to promote him to a panelist. Martin, just give us a quick second and we'll hear from Professor White. Let's go with one question while I'm getting him elevated.
Andy, I had a question for Tommy McKearney.
Go ahead.
Tommy, you went through the hunger strike to the point where you were near death. It was called off. Then comes the next hunger strike. So you were in jail while you were watching the next group go through this. And then Bobby Sands gets elected to Parliament. Was there a feeling that this hunger strike might get called off before the next set of prisoners were to die?
Well, there was a great hope, not so much an expectation, but there was a great hope that it might save Bobby's life and the life of the others. It was a tremendous achievement to have him elected, and it made an international statement right across the globe. And if anything indicated that H-Block prisoners were not common criminals, it was the election of Bobby Sands to the House of Commons. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt what the people on the ground thought and understood his case to be. Look, we all knew each other in the prison so well that we were very close to each other. There was a great hope, real hope, that it might have been enough to save his life, that it might change the situation. It had an impact way down the line many years later, and that obviously the fact that the British had to make new calculations, as did the Dublin government, make new calculations in the light of that. Unfortunately and tragically, it didn't save his life. And it's something I'd like to just point out here when we're talking about the US thinking about Ireland, when you're talking about, as Fra talks about, a border poll. Be very careful about listening to Dublin governments. The Dublin government at the minute, and for many years, it was very unhelpful through the hunger strikes. In fact, it was more helpful to the British than it was to the Republican cause. And at the moment, there's a concerted effort to try and, by the Dublin government, to prevent any form of border poll described as divisive. So for American friends of Ireland, those people who support the cause of anti-partitionism on this island, breaking the union with Britain, reuniting us politically, be very careful when you're listening to messages coming from the Dublin government there. Unless we have a fundamental change of lineup in the government, but the people in power at the moment are not helpful in terms of support for the cause of Irish unity.
Martin, Dr. White's on with us.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm enjoying the conversation. And when the gentleman who mentioned, I think he has some pamphlets from the 1981 period surrounding the two hunger strikes, and he asked about an archive, it occurred to me that one possibility, and I'm not in charge of space, etc., but the possibility exists that I might be able to have them digitized and then include them as part of what's called the Irish Republican Movement Collection, which is on the web. And Martin has been very helpful we have almost the complete run, if not the complete run, of the Irish people. and Tommy might remember, we have several issues of Forthright are also included in the collection. So my web, if you just do a Google search on Irish Republican Movement Collection at IUPUI, you should be able to find it. And if you can't find it, send a note to Martin and he can put you into, I'm sure he'll be happy to put you in touch with me. And we might be able to, the hard copies could go to the AOH archive, no problem. But in the meantime, and I'd have to talk to the librarians, but we might be able to digitize them and add them and they become part of the collection. And I just, one other thing to add, the collection, there's several things that are part of it. I encourage you all to take a look at it. The person who called in about the role of women in the hunger strike era, one of the things available on the collection is a documentary I made on Coming to Mon, and people might want to take a look at that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. And Peter Kissel has joined us, Martin.
Should I proceed, Martin?
Yeah, you're on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm, for those who don't know me, I'm Peter Kissel. I'm the president of the Irish American Unity Conference. And I want to thank the AOH, Danny and Martin and all for hosting this seminar and inviting people who are not part of AOH. I think we've got quite a few of our members from the IAUC on, and it's very educational. I want to, of course, thank Fra and Tommy and Andree. Every time I hear from folks like you, I learn more, and we all learn more. And this is an aspect of the struggle that I was not aware of, frankly, the 1980s strike. So I've learned an awful lot today. I do have kind of a follow-up question. I do want to apologize to Tim, by the way. I was watching on YouTube the whole time, and I thought I was on Zoom. So I'm sorry for the mix-up on that. But I appreciate, and Fra, you really answered first my question about what is the lesson that we Irish Americans can apply today in trying to get England out of Ireland, which, as you know, is an ongoing struggle. And I think you've answered it very well with respect to the importance of Irish American politicians, and some of whom are not even Irish American. A lot of our politicians who are conscious of the struggle are just interested in social justice and freedom for all of Ireland. I guess, just to kind of follow up a little bit, I'm located in Washington, D.C., so I work with Congress quite a bit. And I'm always looking to apply the lessons that people who have been in the fight for so long, when I sit down with or Zoom with, these days, Zoom with congressional staffers. So I just, I found that very helpful. If you want to add anything to, what message we could carry forward to Congress to keep this going. Because as you know, the struggle to get the oppressive British out of Ireland continues to this day.
Any of our guests from Ireland want to comment on that?
I don't know. I think what Tommy and myself have said, the crucial element, I think there's opportunities that come to the Labour and new administration, that the possibilities of seriously increasing the pressure or to push the British in the direction of Irish unity. That certainly in Ireland, there's hardly a day goes by on the media that Irish unity is not mentioned. And I think what you need to do is to build that pressure up. And certainly in America, and Martin would tell you that besides the politicians, one of the big helps that came through at that time was trade unions, and how you influence them in terms of huge memberships, of huge things, about encouraging them to become involved in the whole question of Irish unity and try to build that whole thing up. And see, the H-Block protests didn't just happen. They happened obviously due to the hunger strikes, but also places like America. They happened because people took it upon themselves to constantly build towards an objective, and that was to highlight and the impact of the hunger strike and the conditions. And Irish unity, at the end of the day, is a thing that we all strive towards. And I think that's the thing. We build that pressure up, and I think that's the crucial thing.
See,
Can
the other
Can
thing
I
is
just add, sorry.
Go ahead.
Right. So one of the things about this, I think it has to be emphasised, is that because of the conditions in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, that the question of partition will not go away. This isn't something that's going to be left in the hands of the English to decide. That there is an inevitability about the ending of partition, and that it's something that has to be put on the table now. It has to be talked about, and it has to be the authorities in Britain, in Dublin and abroad have to be reminded that this issue will not go away and that the conditions are changing, if only down to demographics. And on that basis, I think we've got to make sure that this is kept alive. Fra talks about the trade union movement in the States. It would be very useful if the trade union movement in the United States would have a conversation with the trade union movement in Ireland and Britain, that if we don't negotiate this, that we would end up back again in the same situation we've been in the past, that if there isn't a democratically arrived at situation, we're going to find ourselves back in the same conflict we've been in for centuries on this island.
Yeah,
I think Tommy and Fra have spoken well about the wider issues. Right now, we have a huge pressure on Britain because you have Brexit. We see the pressure that the Ways and Means Committee have created in a very, very practical way, the use of Congress in putting pressure on Britain around its obligations under the Good Friday Agreement and under the Withdrawal Agreement has been absolutely immense and has actually put the Irish government on the back step, because Tommy's absolutely right around the Irish government. Partition has benefited Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. They have benefited from partition. They don't want to see an end to it. All island arrangements threaten their political power. They're under pressure around international law. Look at this week around what they did on the Finucane case. They flew in the face of the congressional letters that have been put together. They flew in the face of the Irish government, and they flew in the face of the European Court on Human Rights. They are completely isolated because of that. That creates an argument around an all-island future. And then you see what they've done around the Stormont House Agreement as well, where there are victims from across the divide, across the experience of conflict, who all need the Stormont House Agreement implemented. And the Irish government, and again US, and again the European Court have supported that this would be seen to be done, and the British government are turning their face away from that. And that also creates an argument for all island institutions of justice. So if we keep going back to law, if we keep going back to previous agreements and exposing where the British government sit on all of that, I think that creates new opportunities. And if we're talking about, demands that can be made, keep going back to Dublin and talking about the Citizens' Assembly, an assembly that brings in unionism, brings in people from different sectors, women, young people, people from trade unions, people from different parts of economic society, to discuss what all island institutions might look like and how they can be made in a way that achieves majority consent in the North. This is very practical work that we can do, and it is very achievable.
Even at the moment, the simplest fact is the health service. Why have we got 2 different health services on this island? A small island of less than 8 million people. Why can we not cooperate on that? Yes, Andree, there's lots of basic things that can be done to indicate the value of the one island approach.
Martin?
Yeah, can I get Danny?
Yes, sir.
Look, let's make no mistake about this. We have a strategy. The British have a strategy. They want to celebrate next year the centenary of the 6 counties. And the idea behind it is, this is a great place. Let's make the best of it and continue on. We've got to push, like Fra said, our politicians, our publicity. Let's show them this forum. Hunger Strike of 1981, all of those showed what British rule is really based on. The sectarianism, the willingness to abuse Irish prisoners, all of the things, criminalization, the policy. But what's going to have to happen for us is we can try to push the politicians, make our politicians aware that we want them to do something to promote a united Ireland. That's key. that raising money for the groups that promoted in Ireland, as well as the publicity that we do to make all of those things happen.
Any other closing comments, Martin? Or closing comments? Anything else you wanted to say?
Look, as Danny mentioned before, we have a Christmas appeal. It's for, if you look at our website, see the groups that we give money to. Those groups are hurting for money. They need our money. Prisoners groups, National Graves groups, other groups that we support in the north of Ireland. That's crucial. And I'm asking everybody a special appeal, even in these difficult times of fundraising. The AOH division specifically, send the money in. Try and contribute, keep it going so we can give that money to the groups so badly deserve. Politically, we've got new political leadership, new political structure starting in the United States in the beginning of January. Let's use this opportunity. We have an administration, we have congressmen who may be more, and women who may be more receptive to a united Ireland, to putting the pressure on the British government than past administration. Let's try and use this opportunity as often as we can, make our voices heard. We're not asking them to spend a lot of money. We're asking them to put pressure on the British for Irish justice and for issues like, those that are relevant to justice, and others promote for issues like a border poll. And let's keep working. We're going to have more programs like this. The legacy of the hunger strike is something that we want to honor, promote, make people aware of. These are the lessons. You heard some of the speakers today talk about it. I think everybody walks away, including myself, walk away with a better understanding. And we want to promote do more of that in future. Let's expose British rule, what it's really about. Thank you very much. I want to congratulate Danny and everybody else for putting this on. We can't bring speakers to America at the moment. We have programs like this. And I want to thank Peter Kissel, Professor White, Irish Northern Aid, the Brehens, all the groups that united on this, just the same way we did in 1980 and 1981 behind the hunger strikers, and Irish America became so important at that time.
Thank you, Martin. President Keane, for closing comments.
Yes, thank you very much. I am so overwhelmed by the information that we received today and the number of our members who are watching. On the ladies' side, we are really under the great guidance of Dolores Desch. She has a donate now button on Facebook, for Giving Tuesday. We're getting donations even that way because some of our groups aren't meeting. But we raise money for Freedom for All Ireland year round, not only just the Christmas appeal, because now we want to do what we can. President-elect Biden was very proud when the BBC newscaster asked, "What do you have to say to the BBC?" And President Biden said, "BBC, I'm Irish," and walked away. So I think you're right that now is the time to strike. And under the guidance and in the cooperation with Danny and Martin and everyone else, we are here to help you the best we can. And I promise that we will. And thank you very much. I learned so much. I was a college student in the 80s, but not in the Northeast. I was in the Bible Belt, so we didn't hear much about what was going on. I got my information when I came home and picked up the newspapers. So thank you very much for taking the time and for being here to educate, inform, and encourage us to move forward and energize that movement for Freedom for All Ireland. Thank you so very much for being here.
Everybody, we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank Tommy, Andree, Fra. Your words today were absolutely incredible. I will tell you right now, you will be invited back. We are going to do this beyond COVID, so this isn't just a one-time thing. And we look forward to seeing you all when we return to Ireland, hopefully very soon. I don't think I've gone to Ireland in the last 4 or 5 times that I haven't seen Andree or someone from her family. So we're looking forward to that. In closing, I want to thank Chris Cook and Tim Noonan from our digital coordinator positions. You guys have done a great job. Chris is so technically savvy, he was able to prevent me from putting him up on the screen. I was able to get Tim Noonan on a couple times, but I wanted to recognize that without you folks, we couldn't do this. Everyone, thank you. God bless, and we will talk to you soon. Last comment, I was reminded, this will be on YouTube in about 5 minutes once it renders. We will be sharing it out on our Facebook pages, and we invite everybody to share the YouTube link. That's one of the most important things we could do, especially over the next 5 days. Over 200 people in attendance today between Zoom and YouTube. We really appreciate it. Thank you.